Good morning. We got Mac. Hello, Mac. All Marcus and Mac watching together. What better way to start the morning as a couple than watching me talk about the Bible? Hi, Lindsay. Richard. Hello. There we go. Hey, buddy. That's me and Marcus's standard greeting. Hey, buddy. Um, yeah. Anyway. It is April 30th, the last day of the month, an entire month. Morning, Paula. Start to finish in lockdown. Hi, Laura. Um, and what could be the last day, so you can heckle me together. Yeah. Um, what could be the last day in like the fullest extent of lockdown. Things start to slowly open back up tomorrow, so we at least hopefully made it through the worst part of the quarantine. And certainly the weather looks like it's going to give us some opportunities to get back outside and just trying to shine some optimistic light on the situation. Hi, Laura Fuentes. I just always have to say Laura's last name, Laura Fuentes. Nothing wrong with Laura Tibbs, who's also watching, but man, Laura Fuentes is fun. Okay, so we are in Mark chapter 6. Remember, we said we're looking to Jesus for our view of God, and I would like to. Hi, Allison. Good morning. What I want to do today, there's a couple themes going on here, and this is one of those stories that's just explosive in that there are so many. When you look at these stories, the ancients talked about reading the scriptures like you're turning a gem, and you look at a gem from a different angle, and every different way you turn it, it looks different. Sometimes it looks like a whole different jewel. And so we look at stories like this, and there are just so many different ways that you can look at this and explore this. So we'll look at a couple different themes, and then hopefully you'll take it and think through what it means for you and for your walk with God and walk through this life and all that. So here we go. The apostles, or the 12 disciples, returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. Remember a few weeks ago, this is, I think, episode 18, by the way, which is crazy. A few weeks ago, I think it was last week, maybe episode 14, 15, something like that, Jesus sent out his 12, and he told them, take nothing with you, rely on God to do the things you've seen me doing. And so they went out, and here they return. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while. So where were they headed? They were headed to a desolate place. You could also call it the wilderness. Keep that in mind. For many were coming and going, and they had no leisure time even to eat. And they went away in a boat to a desolate place. They're off to the wilderness. They're exhausted. They've just been traveling with small amount. Morning, Lori, I'm sorry, and Christy. Good to see you guys. They're headed off to a desolate place because they're just beat. Now, they went away in the boat, and that's an important detail. Now many saw them going and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. So, and Lori, you'll appreciate this, having been a fellow pilgrim to the Promised Land. In Galilee, the Sea of Galilee is central, and it's like a big bowl. And one of the things that I learned, morning Jackie, one of the things I got to experience when I was there that I never thought about before, you can, because of the way it's like down at the bottom of this bowl, you can look for miles and see what's going on. And someone who grew up, hey Dan, someone who grew up on the lake, had an eye for seeing what was going on very far away. So we're out on the boat with this guide, and he looks approximately 3 miles away, and he's talking with us about the it's the church where supposedly the Beatitudes, the Sermon on the Mount took place, and I think it's called the Church of the Beatitudes or something like that. And he says, you see those 3 guys over there farming bananas. Now this is miles away. Hey Christine, miles away. He was able to identify. He knew by name who it was that was out farming bananas, and all it looked to me like was a blob of trees, and there were a couple little specks. So what that instantly, I thought about verses like this, that if Jesus is in a boat with his disciples and they're headed somewhere, it would have been nothing for an entire town to look out and say, oh, look, there's Jesus with his disciples. And they ran. So they're trying to get to a desolate place to rest because they're exhausted. But everyone from the whole bowl is able to see. It's like they're in the middle of an arena almost. And they're able to see and run. And by the time this boat that's plodding along the Sea of Galilee gets there, there's like a crowd waiting for them. So here we go. Hi, Jackie. When they went ashore, he saw the great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. Now, that in and of itself is Moses language. We'll go back to Moses language in a minute. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, this is a wilderness, this is a desolate place, and the hour is now late. Send them away to go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, okay, so the problem on the table is they are in the wilderness and there is nothing to eat. There's a great crowd in the wilderness and there is nothing to eat. Morning, Tommy. So there's nothing to eat. They're in the wilderness. And he answered them, you give them something to eat. So he's telling his disciples, you feed them. Just feed this crowd, which we learned would be like around 10,000 or so. There were at least 5,000 men, and that's all that they counted back then. Morning, Coach. So he says, you give them something to eat. And they say, do you want us to go buy 200 denarii, 200 days' wages worth of bread to give them to eat? And he said to them, how many loaves do you have? Go and see. And when they had found out, they said, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to sit down in groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and fifties. And taking the 5 loaves and 2 fish, he looked up to heaven. He blessed and broke the loaves and gave them to his disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they all ate and were satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. I always used to wonder, man, what is it about the 12? Why 12? And then I realized one day, well, there were 12 of them, and they each had a basket, and that's why there were 12. But there is actually, morning Shannon, hi Bianca, deeper symbolism here. This is the kind of thing. Now remember that we modern Westerns like to find one meaning. Like, what's the one meaning to this? But the ancient Jews, they love to look at stories and unpack them, and there is so much ancient Jewish symbolism wrapped up into this that it would have had the whole Galilee. There would be like, there was drama in Galilee from this miracle. With so much drama in the Galilee, so my son would have just said, "Never again, Dad." Let's talk a little bit about what this miracle would have signified. Now, for one of the backstories in the Gospels, as I'm getting excited about this because I'm a Bible nerd, one of the backstories in the Gospels, is the Jews were waiting for a new Moses. There's a point in Deuteronomy chapter 18, right around verse 15, 16, 17, where Moses says, and God will raise up for you a second Moses. So they understood this would be the Messiah who would lead them to a new promised land with new promises. And so much of what you read in the Gospels is I'm still proud of myself for that reference to drama. Anyway, so much of what you read in the Gospels are the authors telling stories that will sink back and present Jesus as this new Moses. None is more spectacular than this one. One of the most famed moments of God and Moses and provision and move to the promised land are these moments when the Israelites who were rescued from slavery in Egypt, they find themselves where? In the wilderness. What's the problem on the table? They have nothing to eat. And so what does God send them? He sends them bread called manna, which means, what is it? Bread from heaven to feed them by the thousands. So the Israelites spoke of a new Moses and a new Passover and a new deliverance and a new manna. They were waiting for the storehouses of heaven to again be opened up and for God to provide them with new manna, new bread from heaven. And so when Jesus does this, and this is symbolic language that would have been obvious to all. They're in the wilderness, they have no food, and Jesus multiplies bread from heaven, miraculous, supernatural bread to feed the masses. What is he saying here? He's saying, I am the new Moses. I am leading you to a new promised land with a new set of promises. There's a new Passover, new deliverance from your oppression. So much symbolism in here. So, for instance, Jesus is born, and he's an infant in danger. He's an infant who's hidden, just like Moses. Moses is placed in a basket. Jesus is placed in a manger. Emphasis on what the baby is placed in. Moses speaks to and ministers to, is kind toward women at a well. Jesus comes on the scene. He's kind to a woman at a well. There are just so many different parallels, but none more bigger. I promise you, when Jesus provided supernatural bread for the masses, everybody present would have thought, this is the new manna from heaven. This is the new Moses. So this was a powerful, powerful miracle that Jesus performs that was much more than just about, hey, look what I can do, or much more than just meeting a practical need. Jesus is talking about, and incidentally, when as Jesus would have grown up and for hundreds of years before him, there was bread kept in the temple called the bread of the presence, or the bread of the face, the bread of the presence of God. And when during festivals the priest would bring out the bread and they would say, behold, God's love for you. So Jews associated bread with life, bread with substance, bread with spiritual presence of substance, bread as the presence of God, bread as salvation from God, bread. And so when Jesus, hey Dennis, how you doing? It's Crazy Dennis, one of my favorite people on the planet and one of the closest men in the presence of God that I've ever been around. Always good to see you. Hi Annette. So anyway, talking about how Moses brought manna, Jesus provides bread. It all connects together. This was a powerful miracle in terms of who Jesus was and who he was announcing that he was to people. Okay, one last thing, and there's a whole other thing you can do with that. With Jesus providing spiritual substance, Jesus being the bread of life, connection with Jesus giving food for the soul, all that. What's God can bring what? You know what, Dennis? Just while everybody's here, Dennis once told me, and I've never forgotten it. God can do more in 3 minutes in your life than you could do in 30 years. That for me just always stuck with me and shaped me, and has influenced the way I pray and think. And anyway, so one last thing that I wanted to talk with you about. There is this, Jesus is about to provide bread, manna, spiritual, supernatural bread. He's about to feed thousands and thousands of people. Where does he start? What question does he ask? He asks them, what do you have? What do you have? And so if you've ever thought about doing anything for God, God will often start with that question. What do you have? In fact, let's go back to Moses. Anybody know what question God asks Moses? God is sending Moses to save the Israelites. This huge, probably one of the biggest military ventures on the planet would have been to go and free the slaves from Pharaoh. Okay? And he goes to Moses. He says, I've chosen you. Moses says, I can't do it. And then God asks Moses a question. He says, what's that in your hand? He says, what do you already have? And he has a staff. And God would use that staff to do the miraculous, to part the Red Sea, to whatever. But it is, I think, highly significant that Jesus says, hey, all these people need to eat. What do you have? And he starts with what they have. Now, 5 loaves of bread and 2 fish obviously can't feed. Obviously, what we have can't get the job done. When we're talking about, God, I want you to do something big through me. Obviously, we don't have the skills. We don't have the resources. But God is probably going to start with your talents, your passion, your gifts, your story, your resources, and then he will take them, bless them, and multiply them, and do way more through you and the things that you have than you would have ever thought possible. But it almost always is going to start with, what do you have? So as you think about doing anything for God, as you think about getting out of any jam, as you think about God moving in your life, it's probably going to start. It's probably not just going to be you wake up and there's a check in your mailbox, or somehow something totally unexplainable happens that has a lot of times it's going to start with you, Morning Shelby, looking and saying, okay, here is something that I have, here is something I can do. And then just like Jesus with the bread, you lift it up to God and you say, God, bless this, use this, and I'm just going to start pouring it out. And then you look and you see, wow, God did, Morning April, God did way more through that than I ever would have dreamt that he could have. So this is it appears like it's a story about Jesus. Hey, Alexis, hope you're doing well over in PA. Love seeing all the pictures and stories of your kids. Loved hearing Sadie teach us all about the Passover. So this miracle looks like it's just this supernatural. God did some amazing thing and multiplied some bread, which would have been impressive in and of itself. But then you look deeper into some of the layers of what God is saying, and it's inexhaustible. And that, for me, keeps me going back more and more and more to these scriptures that are thousands of years old and yet still speak so much into our everyday lives and real life situations. All right, well, hey, have a good weekend. May Day tomorrow, which is always just a good day of weather returning and life returning and summer returning, and hopefully that's a pick-me-up for you as we continue to battle through this quarantine stuff, and I'll see you next week. Have a good weekend.